In Ben 10 Omniverse's 49th episode, And Then There Were None, we get introduced to a team of corrupted Ben counterparts gathered by Vilgax from alternate dimensions. These Bens are Bad Ben, Albedo, Benzaro, Mad Ben, and Nega Ben. Since this episode first released, it's left me with some interesting questions that I want to discuss with you today. We know from the episode that Vilgax and Eon have been gathering these alternate Ben counterparts in order to corrupt them and turn them into his Omnitrix-wielding army. We've seen Vilgax use the Omnitrix in tandem with Bioids in the past to produce an army of transforming aliens, but clearly this time he's trying a different approach. I briefly considered why he wouldn't just gather an army of alternate Vilgaxes, but his objective is an army of Omnitrix users, so I suppose gathering different Vilgaxes would be irrelevant in that scenario. However, couldn't he find a timeline or dimension where Vilgax himself was the one who received the Omnitrix? While it could be possible that such a place in the Omniverse exists, I want you to consider something. When we're introduced to the group of good Bens who fight alongside Ben Prime and No Watch Ben, we get the following characters: Gwen 10, Ben 23, and Ben 10k. Something interesting to note is that every version of Ben that we see here, minus Gwen of course, are versions of Ben himself. However, I think we can argue the point that the reason we have Gwen here instead of Ben is that she takes the place of Ben in her respective dimension. As a result, her role is aligned with that of Ben's, and she has the same heroic outlook as Ben Prime does. In a similar way, it could be that if a Chimera sui generis Omnitrix wielder does exist, or even more specifically, an Omnitrix wielding Vilgax does exist, they only exist because they take the position of that dimension's Ben. By taking Ben's place, this individual would have to possess the same kind-hearted heroic personality. We even see in the Gwen 10 episode from Classic that Ben is the more responsible and intellectual one, whereas Gwen is the one goofing around with her newfound alien powers, something much more in line with the personality of our Ben Prime. Therefore, we can assume that Vilgax wouldn't be able to see eye to eye with his Omnitrix-wielding counterparts, and as a result, he has to fall back on using different versions of Ben himself instead. He can't use any adjacent Omnitrix wielder, because each of them assumes Ben's role within their dimension. As such, he is confined only to using false Bens, such as Albedo, as well as Bens who strayed from their intended righteous path, such as Eon and Bad Ben. In the same way that we see Ben and Gwen go through a role reversal in the Gwen 10 timeline, when we go to the Mad Ben dimension, we find Ben taking a role more like Vilgax, and Rook taking a role more like that of Siphon. What I'm basically trying to get at here is that these corrupt timelines and dimensions, Ben has Vilgax's position, and Vilgax has Ben's position, or at least some other character takes the place of Ben while Ben takes the role of Vilgax. With all of this in mind, we can assume that Vilgax's plan almost was a plan to gather up alternate Vilgaxes, but instead they're specifically Bens who share the same mindset and role as Vilgax, as well as Albedo and Eon, because those two are just kind of plain evil. I got nothing for those two. But this brings me on to another big question that I've been considering for a long time now. Why didn't Vilgax just get one of the evil Bens to transform into Alien X and either kill Ben Prime, erase all good Bens from existence, turn all Bens evil and make them subservient to Vilgax, make Vilgax the wielder of the Omnitrix, or any other number of equally convenient plans? This is another question that I think I have an answer to. First off, we can immediately rule out that the alternate Bens just simply didn't have access to a Celestial Sapien transformation, because at the very least we saw an ultimate alien that Albedo had access to Alien X. People might point out that in Omniverse, Albedo used a new Ultimatrix, but in actuality this was only a stabilizer device that would allow him to retain alternate alien forms for a longer period of time. Therefore, he definitely still had access to the same playlist of aliens as he would have in Ultimate Alien. We can say for certain that at the very, very least, Vilgax had managed to recruit one person who had access to Alien X, which was Albedo. But why didn't he use it? Let's quickly discuss Ben Prime. Ben Prime is from the Prime timeline, which makes him the so-called original Ben. Let's acknowledge the fact that we have only ever seen two Bens using Alien X, Ben Prime and Ben 10k, albeit in conjunction with atomics, so that maybe might disprove this point I'm about to make, but I think it's still valid. Let's remember that Ben 10k isn't a Ben from an alternate dimension, but Ben Prime from the future. Ben Prime and Ben 10k are the same person, just at different stages of their life. I don't think this is just a coincidence either. Let's now go back to Albedo. All things considered, the guy's off his rocker by the time of Omniverse. In order to use their powers, the multiple personalities of a Celestial Sapien must agree to carry out the presented motion. Bellicus and Serena, the two personalities that exist within Ben Prime's Alien X, are distinctly different individuals. Bellicus is the voice of rage and aggression, while Serena is the voice of love and compassion. The two are often unable to reach any agreements, and thus don't tend to use their powers very often as a result. However, with Ben Prime within them, the two voices are able to reach agreements more easily, and they refer to Ben as the voice of reason. I think this ability is what defines Ben Prime's timeline as the Prime Timeline. This is the only timeline or dimension where Ben Tennyson is able to be the voice of reason, due to the exact course of events that took place within said timeline. For a moment, let's talk about the Omnitrix. We know for a fact that Azimuth had to somehow get his hands on Celestial Sapien DNA in order to be able to contain it within the Omnitrix, and we know that Azimuth is at least acquainted with Professor Paradox. Personally, I believe Paradox is the one who retrieved Celestial Sapien DNA. Professor Paradox himself even says that he and the Celestial Sapiens are not on good terms, so perhaps his actions at the time were what caused their current perception of him.
I'm not supposed to go within 500 light years of them.
Paradox, of course, had to retrieve the DNA from somewhere, and we can likely assume that he got it from whichever Celestial Sapien originally constituted Bellicus and Serena alone. Bellicus and Serena have at least seemingly been in existence for longer than the first time Ben transformed into Alien X, and they've been known to survive the universal destruction caused by the Annihilagenesis Toria Thimiaghost, meaning that their prolonged existence isn't necessarily confined to the existence of a specific reality. Let's assume, for the sake of this video, that all Celestial Sapien samples within the Omnitrix across all the different timelines and dimensions all stem from Bellicus and Serena's sample. Professor Paradox adjacent individuals across different dimensions and timelines would be able to cross space-time in order to retrieve it, thus allowing the Omnitrix wielder of that dimension or timeline to use Alien X as a result. Same as our Ben Prime. It could even be Professor Paradox himself doing it, seeing as he is able to cross between different timelines and dimensions. He knows what will happen next, so it is possible that he knows nothing will come of giving Celestial Sapien DNA to alternate Omnitrix wielders. What I'm essentially trying to get across here is that regardless of if other Bens have access to Alien X, Ben Prime is the only one actually able to use it. Let's take a look at all the non-Prime Bens we see throughout Omniverse. Ben 23 and Gwen 10 are as inexperienced, goofy, and immature as young Prime Ben, meaning they'd likely not be able to form an agreement with Alien X. No Watch Ben is a lot more emotionally mature than these two, but he's just as, if not more, inexperienced. On top of that, he's a lot more easily frightened. He's not going to be able to reach much of an agreement, though I will say he's the most likely candidate for doing so outside of Ben Prime himself. Unfortunately for him, his lack of experience makes him unlikely to make any good points when confronted with Bellicus and Serena. Mad Ben might be able to relate with Bellicus to some degree, but I feel like the two of them are way too far up their own asses to actually see eye to eye, and they're definitely not able to convince Serena into anything. Mega Ben is a moody teenager. He's too busy speedrunning Doom Eternal to even bother speaking with Bellicus and Serena in the first place, so that rules him out. Bad Ben is pretty much just all the worst parts of Ben's personality, so that's obviously disqualifying him. And Benzaro? I mean, come on. Do I even have to explain why this guy isn't going to win an argument? He can barely speak. This fun! The fact that only Ben Prime is capable of using Alien X, at least to me, speaks volumes for just how responsible he can be. He is kind, brave, thoughtful, selfless, and intelligent. He always tries his best to do what is right, even though he's proven on countless occasions just how easy it would be for him to take over the entire universe if he wanted to. At the end of the day, I think that's what defines our Ben Prime, and that is why only he can truly handle the great responsibility of wielding the power of Alien X. At least when the network isn't finger-fucking his character anyway.
You're strangling me! Get away from me, you wicked she-beast! This thing just isn't working for me anymore.